Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everybody's having a good Tuesday today. This is Chris Weiser, coming to you live from Tech Squad HQ in Milwaukee. So we have a pretty interesting webinar today in our weekly webinar series. We're going to be talking today about the importance of policy in your workplace. And I do have a guest with me today. His name is Josh Van Berkom. He's from another MSP partner of mine. MSP means Managed Service Provider. And Josh has had a lot of experience with internet, email, and social media policy, so he'll be joining us shortly. I know he's running a couple minutes behind. So a couple of things that we're going to start out with is,
Actually, I'm here, Chris.
Oh, you're here, Josh. Okay, great. So Josh has joined us. In today's world, what's things that are hitting us as employers, and myself is included with this, and I'm not really trying to sell anything on this webinar today. It's more of a FYI and a good service to our clients. The things that we run into are the internet's changing so fast, email's changing so fast, and now social media has basically crept up and attacked us, and all these different things that are going on. How do we prepare ourselves as business owners, and how do we prepare ourselves against potential threats or different things that we're going to go through? So we have a couple things that we're just going to hit on today, and this is not going to be a super long webinar, and we'll just kind of go through it, and then we'll have an offer at the end for anybody if you're interested in that. So there are basically three types of policy that are out there, and Josh, if you have anything that you want to chime in on this, feel free as we go here. And actually, before I get into this, let me just back up 1 second. Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with policy, and I know that you have a little bit, you have more than me. So if you just maybe want to give an introduction of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Joshua Van Berkom of SourcePath Consulting in the greater Detroit area, and we service small businesses' technology needs. Typically that includes helping them with their internal business processes, employee handbooks, user policies, and social media and internet usage policies always ends up tying into that. So we've been servicing this area for about 15 years, and that's back when we used to fax instead of email. So obviously it's changed quite a bit since then.
So basically you're old, is what you're saying.
I'm pretty old.
Okay, well, Josh is a friend of mine too, so it works out well. And those of you that know me personally know that I give everybody a hard time. So, all right, well, we'll start on here. And basically, there are three types of policy that we want to make sure we're preparing ourselves for. Obviously, number one being an internet policy, and that internet use policy in place will help you eliminate any confusion. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that hits staff members is they don't know what to do and what not to do. So that's something that we'll state and we'll kind of go over a little bit. And then the possible abuse that could prevent your company from functioning productively. There we go, I got it out. Then there's also email policy. Having that email policy in place will help you eliminate lost productivity and potential theft of sensitive and confidential information, and also prevents the transfer of potential threats, making sure that you have things in place so your people know. So we'll go over that a little bit, and then we're also going to go over social media policy. And I think the social media policy is the biggest one. Email policy and internet policy has been around for a little bit, but social media policy is something that's brand new. And I don't want to say brand new because it's now 3 or 4, I don't know how old Twitter is, but 3 or 4 or 5 years old. But people actually creating policy for it is something that's kind of on the cutting edge because people don't really know how to do and what to handle it. So any thoughts from you on that, Josh?
I think you hit on the biggest part. People don't know what to do about it right now, but it's been around for 5 years. And I think more than anything that catches business owners off guard is this stuff changes so fast. The best thing that you can do is review your process, review your handbook, your usage policies once a year. Once a year is good enough, but if you let it slide 2 or 3 years, you could have employees using work computers, saying things on work time that aren't things that you necessarily reflect your views as your business. So just make sure you're reviewing this stuff once a year, and you'll find yourself in a much better spot.
Yep, and some things that I totally see out there is that people just don't realize what they should be and shouldn't be doing. And I think, what's ironic is I was literally at a client yesterday for our internet company or our technology company. And I was at a client with our sales guy, and we were just kind of doing a little bit of what we call a QBR, quarterly business review, with them. This was a pediatric firm, so it's a medical firm. And we were just kind of going over some of the things that she had. And one of the questions on my mind, obviously because we do that, but also because I had the webinar today, so I was thinking a lot about it, was, we need to really go over what your policies are in here. And she's like, oh, we're not going to do that because the higher-ups don't want to put that in. And having internet policy is really, really critical in today's day. So we're going to kind of move on to why would you have an actual internet policy. And I think, we have 4 main things highlighted here. And again, the slides today are not that informative, so it's more me and Josh talking. That's going to be the value. But basically, the purpose of your business is to make money. And in order to accomplish that, the company has to have productive employees. And the internet can be a time drain, and it often can prevent the employees from being as productive as they should be. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind in that is Facebook. And, Twitter's definitely coming on to being a little bit of a nuisance. But I think Facebook's being the biggest issue on that. And with such a wide range of that information available on the internet, it's totally necessary to clarify the company's expectations of its employees regarding that internet access. So what can they do? What can't they do? Do you allow Facebook during business hours? And sometimes,
well,
yes, go ahead.
If I can chime in, another big part is what type of business are you in? Because these policies change so dramatically from industry to industry. For instance, if you're a marketing firm, you're not gonna block Facebook. I mean, you can't. That's what you do. So it all changes. But in terms of time wasting, the number one time wasting entity out there is, no big surprise, the federal government. More federal government employees spend time wasted surfing the internet than anything else. But number 2 is the insurance vertical. So that happens to be a vertical that we market very heavily towards. I have a lot of insurance agency customers, and for these particular customers, they can get a lot of productivity back by having an internet policy. So it really does depend what market, what business you're in.
Totally agree. That's really good. Really good feedback and advice there. And, I think with a strong policy in place, this not only protects the employer, but it really also protects the employee, because if you don't tell somebody what they can and can't do on the internet, not only will they not know, but they can do things that oftentimes they won't realize is potentially a violation or even a danger on the side of things. And that's kind of comes into the confusion and the frustration side of things, because, I see how many people play Farmville or whatever on Facebook. Well, what a lot of end users don't realize is those things are little programs that run on your computer, and oftentimes they can contain malicious software, what's called malware, and that can really come into play. So any thoughts on that, Josh? Well, since you're giving good advice.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, that gets into policy. Most companies, I would hope, have some sort of a policy that employees aren't allowed to install software on their computers without permission. And this is where you get into people listening to streaming music services, and they don't think anything of it. Why? Because they used to bring in radios, or maybe they could set their office phones so that they could listen to the on-hold music while they're there. And we've upgraded their phone systems and taken that away, so all of a sudden they're streaming music. And what do you tell a company where they say, hey, our internet's really slow, and you've got 40 employees streaming music at the same time? Do you want an extra $1,000 a month to bump up your bandwidth so that they can stream music? Or do you want to put a policy in place so that they can't do that, and you're going to get more productive employees and not incur that extra expense?
Man, that's such a good point, because we literally just ran into this. We have an elderly care facility that we work with, and they moved from a standard phone system over to a voice over IP phone system, which means all of their phone calls go over the same internet connection that they browse on, and they were running into some voice quality issues. And so one of our engineers was checking on it. He checked with the cable company. They were maxing out their upload bandwidth and their download bandwidth on a day-to-day basis because of all the stuff that the employees were doing, the biggest of which, listening to Pandora. That's streaming music. So you're spot on with that one, Josh. So
all the time.
So good, good feedback. Yep. So that brings us up to our fourth point, which is the lawsuit protection. Another a really important reason to have that strong internet policy is to save your company from unnecessary lawsuits. Unless you have a clear policy on what is and it is not acceptable on the internet, and you can't really dismiss somebody when they're abusing the company's internet. If you say, you were on the internet or you did this, we were at another company. I got 3 good examples in the first slide here that we were at a company a couple weeks ago where one of our techs was doing something, and he was remoted into an end user's computer and literally watched that end user view adult content on their computer while they were on it. They didn't realize they were connected. It was a migration period, and the end user was viewing adult content on the fly. That employer, I actually made the call to that CEO, and I said, hey, what can you do about this? And he's like, well, I don't know. What can I do? And I said, well, do you have a policy? He said, no. I was like, no. You better talk to your HR person. Go ahead, Josh.
Was your employee violating your acceptable use policy by watching his employee surf inappropriate content? I'm curious how that works.
I don't know about that one. I don't think so. My guy immediately closed it. I hope, right? In our policy, basically, they're not allowed. We do have a policy here, and they're not allowed to look at adult content on our stuff. But luckily, he was on theirs, so I don't think it affected anybody on our side anyway. But the CEO said, well, I don't know what to do. And my question to him was, do you have a policy? He said no. And I was like, well, then you should call an HR attorney and see what you can do, because I don't know that you can terminate this employee for doing what they just did if you never told them they can't.
Well,
so
and all too often these policies are created after something happens. An employer gets sued because of this. Somebody files a grievance. A bunch of malware gets on a computer because people are doing this, or they're going to incur the expense of an increase. It's a very reactive approach, so if you can get out on top of this and keep on it from year to year, you can really save yourself a lot of hassle and a lot of money going down the road.
Yep, I agree with that 100%. So moving forward, what elements should your internet usage policy contain? And this is just some basic guidelines for you to take a look at. And I think the biggest thing you could put on there, it should basically have the company internet is for company business use only. It's to be used only during company business hours. Things like that can prevent an employee from coming in at 7:15 in the morning or staying until 7:15 at night, and then doing some personal stuff that potentially may be negative. Also, all work done on company computers during business hours, including all emails, is company property and cannot be accessed by the employer at any time, and can be accessed by the employer at any time. This is a big stickler right here, because what people don't realize is that their email and their internet is all of your company's property, and they sometimes get possessive of it. I've run into a couple scenarios with this, so that's a big stickler, and that's a really good thing to have in there. Establish what type of computer use is unacceptable, such as accessing personal social media accounts, personal email, adult content, those kind of things. Also, employees must refrain from accessing websites, creating or forwarding email that promotes any type of discrimination, such as racial or sexual discrimination, or that is defamatory or harmful towards another person or group. That's a big deal, and those are really critical that you point those out as well. And employees are not allowed to gain access to or attempt to access other employees' computers, employees' information, or other information unauthorized by the company. So if somebody just literally went on somebody else's computer and tried to log in with their username and password, or tried to log into their website, that's something that could be grounds for dismissal. And what's important on that is that you have all this documented ahead of time, and that you can control it at the time. Because the other thing that comes into play is you have a policy, the employee signed it, you let them go for it. Now when they go to get workman's comp, or not workman's comp, but unemployment, that you actually have bounds for denial on that, and it saves your company time, trouble, and issues. So, and it's also, in addition to those guidelines, inform your employees that whatever is done by the company, for the company, and on the company computer should totally remain confidential and within the confines of the company. That confidentiality aspect is really important as well, because depending on the level of staffer you have, you want to make sure they're not posting the wrong things. So those are important. In addition to that, make sure you let the employees know that when they access those unapproved sites, they risk infecting the computer company with potential viruses or those kind of things that they might not want to have, and it could shut down your home network. So I think anything that you want to add on that, Josh, since we're here?
I don't want to get too far off topic with this, but you know, we get pretty deep into companies' policies and procedures in terms of, for instance, a deletion policy. We believe that every company should have a deletion policy, which is to say, if any email in our company is older than 2 years or 3 years or whatever is appropriate for that business, that it gets automatically discarded, no questions asked, because I have had some customers who've been in a situation, they've been involved in some sort of a lawsuit, in which case it would have been very nice to have said, we have a deletion policy, so that information going back 4 years ago has been purged. However, most companies don't have a deletion policy, so what will happen is they'll get subpoenaed, and people can come in and look at all of the data that's on your machines. And I'm going to tell you something, you see it happen in government or even at companies like Microsoft all the time, when they get involved in some lawsuit, they didn't have a deletion policy, or they had a deletion policy and they didn't adhere to it themselves. If you can prove that it wasn't adhered to, someone's going to come in, they're going to subpoena everything on your network, and they will find something that will inevitably cost you money. It's kind of like just get rid of your old tax returns after a while. There's no reason to keep them around. It's the same kind of concept. So if you don't have a good internet usage policy, that's going to only be further information that they could find in a subpoena on your computers that's going to harm or damage your company. So kind of piggybacking on this is to have a good email deletion policy. You have to be responsible with your data.
Yep, I think really good feedback, Josh. I appreciate that. Okay, well, we'll keep moving on here. So next questions are, why would you have an email policy? Some highlights on that. You can protect against your email threats. Any email policy helps to prevent those email threats. A lot of spam companies are now, spam prevention companies. We use a company called Reflection, and they do a really good job cleaning the content before it actually comes to our clients. A lot of zip files are not allowed and those kind of things anymore. But a well-laid-out email policy makes the staff aware of the corporate rules, what you allow, what you don't allow. And then if those are not allowed, why they're not allowed, so they don't misunderstand that. And it can also help to educate your people against those phishing attacks and potential confidentiality leaks, things that they shouldn't say, which also helps to minimize that legal liability for you. Also, avoiding misconduct. That email policy can help stop any misconduct at the early stage by asking employees to come forward as soon as they receive an offensive email. That protects you as on the company side. And then keeping those incidents to a minimum can really help avoid legal liability. For instance, I know there's a case of Morgan Stanley, just doing some research for this today. I know that the court, this was an issue of Morgan Stanley, I think everybody knows who they are. The courts ruled that a single email communication, this was a racist joke in this case, that cannot create a hostile work environment, and then they dismissed the case against them. So that's those are big factors to avoid misconduct. Also, we were talking a little bit about the liability. If this incident does occur, that email policy can actually minimize the company's liability for that employee's actions. Previous cases have proven that the existence of an email policy can prove that the company has taken steps to prevent inappropriate use of that email system, and therefore it can help free your company of liability. I know that in some additional research I was doing, WorldCom Corporation, for instance, they faced a court case from 2 former employees for allowing 4 racially offensive jokes on its email system. WorldCom successfully defended themselves because they had an email policy that spelled out inappropriate content, and because they took prompt remedial action against the coworker that sent the racially harassing emails. So you see how much value that can be, because usually what happens in a suit, they don't necessarily go against the person that is really at fault. They go for the person that has the deepest pockets. And if you protect yourself with policy, and one of your employees sends something that's offensive to another person via email, and then all of a sudden they want to do a suit of some sort, this would prevent that from happening. And there's precedence on it, so I think there's some value there. Any thoughts on that, Josh? I know you're good at that.
No, I agree. I think that sort of ties into what we had mentioned about the deletion policy. As long as you have a policy in place and it looks like you are making some effort to support that policy, usually you're in really good shape.
Yep, I agree. So the next thing is you can actually educate your employees on the email etiquette. A good example of this is properly sending emails out. How, if you have an employee that's ever, and I think pretty much all of us have run into this at one time or another, where you have an employee that sent a short or an all caps email to someone else, not realizing that that person could be sensitive to it, when in reality they just have their caps lock on. And that's something that's not that big of a deal, but it can be a huge deal if the wrong person responds to it. Also, another thing could be conveying how you want your company email signature to go out on every email communication. That's something they don't realize they should have a lot of times. And I see a lot of companies that don't have that consistent across the board. That's another, it could be a marketing message for that matter,
Disclaimers, etc.
Yep, exactly. You see that in law firms a lot, but not many other places do you see that across the board. So next step is you can actually warn them of email monitoring. If you're going to use email filtering software to check the contents of those employee emails, it's really important to have an email policy that warns your employees that their emails might be monitored and that the company actually owns them. If you not have such a policy, you could be liable for privacy infringement. And that's more about, that just gets to the more of the core of legality regarding email enforcement and email monitoring. So those are all important things to stay on top of.
That's super important, I think, actually, it was a few years ago that it was deemed that you do need to inform your employees that all emails are monitoring, because otherwise it is. And even though it's your own business and it's your email system and they're communicating on your company time, you gotta inform them that you're going to be monitoring the email. Otherwise, when you do monitor it, it can be viewed as an invasion of privacy.
Yep, absolutely. And we have a webinar coming up next week. I believe it's next week, Tuesday, the same time. We do Tuesday webinars every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central. And the one next week is on the importance of archiving and compliance issues with email. We're going to have a specialist, actually, Karen Garino from Reflection, will be on the webinar with me that day. Josh, if you want to come on, you're welcome that day as well. But we will be talking about specifically companies that are responsible to archive their emails. They call it journaling in the technical world. But what people don't realize is any financial firms, any medical firms, any type of state or government-owned industry, like, for example, we do a large high school. They're actually bound. We do the IT for a large high school. We don't go to the high school. But they're actually bound by state law to archive their emails. I believe it's for up to 3 years. I don't know exactly what that is off the top of my head. But they're actually bound by that. The same thing with, we have a Raymond James Financial client. They're an investment firm. They're required by law to journal or archive every email that goes in and out of the place at the server level. So that's really, really important to know. So we're going to be doing that next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central. So some things that we should have contained in the email policy. And I have a long list of these. I could basically, I only have, I think, 5 listed here. I do have 10 that are things that I'm going to go over really quickly. I think the first thing is email risks. You can kind of read a little bit as we go there. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but it should have email risks in it, should have best practices, should have guidelines for personal usage, should warn users about waste of resources, the Facebook / Farm Bill, other things that are potentially issues. The prohibited content is a big factor. Your document retention policy, that's also another big one. Also, the treatment of confidential data, how they should be guidelines to how they should deal with the company's confidential information and the trade secrets, and also an email disclaimer. That's that thing we were talking about on the bottom that Josh was just mentioning, and then also email monitoring, and then probably the measures and violation reporting. And that's a big one to me, that if you warn that if an employee is found to be in breach of the email policy rules, it could result in disciplinary action up to and including termination, if an employee witnesses email policy abuse, they're required to report the incident immediately. All these things are basically the CYA policy. I think everybody knows what that is, but that's covering your backside to make sure that you're protected as an employer. Because again, if you get sued, who are they? You know, if there's an issue, they're going to go after the one with the deepest pockets, and that's often the employer. So, any feedback, Josh?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're going to keep moving on. It's about 10:26. I know I'm going to kind of try and keep this as brief as possible today. I want to keep it around a half hour, maybe 40 minutes if possible. So the next one is moving on to the social media policy. Now, social media, if I actually ask any one of you, other than, and I know there's a couple tech people on the call here that we have today, what is social media? I'm pretty sure that everybody would give us a different answer. You know, there'd be
yes,
and Twitter and LinkedIn and, you know, Dig and all kinds of different things that there's so many different variables in what social media is these days. So it's really important that this is probably, you know, the other ones are there protecting your company more, but I think, in my opinion, a social media policy is really important, not only to protect your company, but to protect your staff from doing things that they don't realize is dumb. Everybody's on Facebook now versus, you know, 5 years ago, how many people were really out there broadcasting your company. I'll give a good example. I know of a friend of mine, not really a friend, but it's an acquaintance of mine that has her Facebook page. She's got the company she works for all over her Facebook page, and every weekend she's out getting hammered drunk and doing really questionable things, and it's all over Facebook with that company's name attached to it. And she even has her company's name right in her name. It's so-and-so, company name. It's like first name, last name, and then company name is right in the name. So you think about that and what that potentially does. Go ahead, Josh.
It really is kind of all this perception of social media and how it affects us is changing. I know that it was 5 or 6 months ago that there were certain state governments that before you could get hired, they actually requested your Facebook username and password before they would consider you for employment. Now that has since been something that's been frowned upon, as it actually violates Facebook's policy because you can't give anyone your account credentials. But it does go to say that people are paying attention as to what goes on, and it's not, you can't just define it as this is our social media policy, because what's acceptable on Facebook is way different than what's acceptable etiquette on LinkedIn. And I think it varies from person to person. I'll give you an example. I'll use myself. I'm fairly liberal when it comes to Facebook, who I accept as friends, who I have conversations with. However, when it comes to LinkedIn, I don't even have a relationship with my fiance because LinkedIn is for business, and my business and her business doesn't overlap. And I've even had friends say, hey, you know, I tried to, how come you haven't accepted my LinkedIn request? And I'm like, hey, that's for Facebook. LinkedIn is a whole different animal. That's just my perception, but I think it's a good thing to define for your company what is and isn't acceptable.
Yep, I totally agree with that. It's very funny, and you know, it seems like the bar is moving all over the place. You know, for a long time, Facebook was only personal, and you know, it was kind of like MySpace too. There was MySpace, and then Facebook came out, and Facebook has kind of taken over. But as they're trying to generate revenue, them being Facebook, they're looking for additional ways to do that, and one of those things to do is now advertising is there, and a lot of people spend a majority of their day looking at a computer in a web browser now, and Facebook is a major part of that. And how you protect yourself from the company side, half the battle is just saying, here's what we allow, here's what we don't allow, here's what we expect you to do, here's what we don't. That definition leads to protection, and it really, all those top 3 things, actually I'd say probably the top 4 things on that list are all kind of linked together, because if you define things, and it probably should be definition, then protection, which then reduces liability, and then to do all those things, you educate on social media etiquette. All those things are important together, and I think the order I probably should redo those in is definition, which is the most important, leads to protection, also helps you reduce liability, and then you can also educate educate on social media etiquette at the same time. So all those things kind of go together. Now, the next step at number 5 on the list here, how do you deal with reviews? This has become such a big factor these days, and this is one of my things that I state, because if you look how, actually, if anybody is friends with me on Facebook, I had a thing that I posted about Progressive a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I think it was last week. I don't know, Josh, you may have seen that, about how Progressive did this big thing and just hammered somebody because so-and-so got killed by a drunk driver, and then they actually sued the estate of the family to avoid paying out the insurance claim to try and prove negligence. And how they handled it on social media was such a black eye for Progressive. It was crazy. So, you know, and it's just really good to be able to sit around in an employee meeting and talk about, if we get a negative or positive review, either one, but the negative probably being the most important, how are we as a company going to deal with that? Because it's not a matter of if anymore, it's a matter of when. So defining those things is really, really critical. I'm
seeing a trend there too, Chris, if I can mention it. I'm starting to see a change, and it's with some of these new and upcoming companies. One of the really good, I mean, everybody kind of sees the liberal guidelines that Google uses, and I don't think it's a reflection, you know, of the culture at the company from any kind of a political standpoint or anything. I think it's the fact that technology changes so quickly. It's tough to create some sort of a policy guideline that doesn't have shifting lines. So you're starting to see, I know Netflix is one. I think I sent you their deck of what they do. But for instance, the expense policy, if you're just going to do expense reports, for example, at Netflix is act in Netflix's best interest. That's it. And I think when it comes to social media guidelines, I think it has to be much more of a barometer in terms of how you should act on behalf of your company, as opposed to try to cover every area, because it changes so quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a really good feedback. I think what I'd probably recommend is having an overall internet policy, with pieces of that being web browsing policy, also not only that, email policy, and then under that social media policy. Your social media policy could say exactly what Josh just said. You know, all things in the internet policy still apply, but when on social media, act in Netflix's best interest. Bam. You know, at least you're covering something, and you still have an internet policy in place that covers it. So, yeah, good thoughts, Josh. Okay, moving on. What elements should your social media policy contain? Now, keep in mind, these are just more my opinion and mine and Josh's opinion. This is, you know, none of this stuff is Bible, but you know, some basic things. Definition again. I think, you know, we've hit this over and over again. What's really important is defining, so you people understand what social media is, at least to you as a company. Which social media and networks are you talking about? Because basically, social media is not just Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It's a lot of different things. So it's making sure you define all those things together, especially with everything linked together now. You see how that kind of has happened. Just making sure you define. And then also, who does that policy apply to? Some people are spokespeople, some people are not. It really kind of depends. And internally, like in my company, I am the face of the company. Usually I'm the guy that's my face out there and doing different things. I think, Josh, you're probably the same with yours. And then,
right.
You know, also, how do you get access to that social media? Do they have to ask permission to get on the internet, or are certain people just allowed? Josh used the example of marketing people or a marketing company. You know, they are social media, so there's not even a question. But a law firm, you know, can you just go on Facebook at any point during the day, or can you not? Or can you just go on Twitter at any point during? Well, do you not?
And that depends big time too, because you will have a lot of law firms that will do collections, and to do collections, they have to hunt people down. Social media is a great tool for that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
I mean, it's very difficult.
And you know, one thing that we're not covering at all in this whole webinar is, what about cell phones in the workplace? What about social media apps on the cell phone in the workplace? in the personal. I think a lot of us have heard of what's now being called BYOD, bring your own device. So a lot of people are bringing their own work phone. We have, in fact, that same elderly care facility that we have requires all his employees to use their own personal phones for work. So is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Does that open up, maybe that's a good webinar topic is, your cell phone. In fact, that is a good webinar topic, so I'll probably put that down on my list. Is, how are those things handled? And, when you require an employee to bring their own phone, or if you allow them to bring their own phone and they have Twitter on their phone, I have a Twitter app on my phone. I have a Facebook app on my phone. I have a LinkedIn app on my phone. Do all those things play into the role, or how do you govern them? Because they could bring that phone into the workplace, not use any company internet, not use anything company, and still do those things. So are they still liable because they're under your roof? So those are things to talk about. In fact, I'm probably going to try and get an attorney on. We'll do that one. That's a really good thought. So moving on, definition of terms is, again, really important. The social media policy overall defined, meaning for spokespeople, for employees, for contractors, those kind of things, and your social media guidelines. And what can your company do on social media and how you're using it. And that's a whole other webinar that we probably should try and go over, a whole other topic, but how to actually put social media into play for your business is a big factor. And then the other things is, how do you handle those mentions? I think putting that in a policy is difficult because you can't gather it, but I think one big thing you can probably put in there is, if you get a negative mention that comes through on Twitter or the Better Business Bureau, or a negative review of some sort, on Angie's List or Craigslist or whatever. I know Angie's List is a contractor one for B2B, but if you have a negative review, here's how you shouldn't deal with it. That's probably the big thing. Don't shoot your mouth off and spout off and blame the customer. Bring it to the attention of management. Let us deal with it. I think that's probably the best way you can handle it, is to actually just say, don't do anything.
Yeah.
Don't shoot your mouth
could
off.
Actually be. That could be a whole separate webinar, because I do have some customers using social media, and maybe people who aren't well versed in the etiquette of social media, they've had to do some damage controls. That would be a great additional webinar. Yeah,
I agree with that. So I'll put that one down on the list too. So, okay, so that's pretty much all we have for today. We are going to have a Q&A session in a second, but what I do want to offer is here at Tech Squad IT, we do a completely free policy assessment. We'll come to you and give you a free internet, email policy assessment of any type, whether it's internet, email, or social media. I'd say, from my experience, 90 to 95% of companies do not have anything. So for those of you that don't have anything, we do have a free internet acceptable use policy that we're just giving away for you to use at your own leisure. And then based on that, if you want to get us to help you put something in, we'll give you a 50% off of staff training session. So if you want go ahead, Josh.
I think that's actually great, because a lot of this stuff changes so much that that's why it becomes such a big litigation point, is because these things are so difficult to define. But one thing that we see is, if you end up having to terminate an employee and they, say that you didn't have an effective policy in place, just the business deciding to get the free policy evaluation, and based on those recommendations, implementing changes, means that you guys have a policy and are attempting to enforce your policy. So if you get those free evaluations, even perhaps if you decide not to do anything, at least save those evaluations, because it could save you money if you ever get sued.
Yep, I totally agree with that. A couple different ways to sign up for that. And remember, if you just want to get the internet policy, all you have to do is put in the email policy, send it into sales@techsquadit.com. Don't forget the IT, sales@techsquadit.com. Send an email in, say, hey, I'd like a copy of the free internet policy. It'll get sent out to you as a Word document. You can do what you want of it. You can use it however you want. We did have a cloud computing seminar here a couple weeks ago, that away as well, and there was just tremendous reviews that came back from the people, because we had 15 people at that seminar. Not one of them, including some really big. We had a company that was here that was 1,200 employees. They had no internet policy of any kind, and I was like, what? how do you not have that? But they didn't have anything. So, okay, any Q&A? I didn't have any pre-done questions or anything prepared, but if anybody has any questions that you want to have asked or answered, feel free to put them in. You can either put them in the chat or you can put them in the questions area, and we will go ahead and answer that. Otherwise, at Q2, we will be shutting her down. So, or maybe sooner if we don't get any questions. Josh, did you have anything that you wanted to cover while we're waiting for any questions to come in?
Probably not anything that would be within this. I mean, when it comes to policy and procedure, it can go so far.
Yeah, I mean, we could seriously talk all day on any one of these topics. It's just a matter of, I think the biggest thing that I can say to anyone that's on this call is, if you don't have anything, at least put something as part of your employee manual defining what you view as acceptable internet content, or maybe what's easier is what is unacceptable. You can talk to an HR firm or something. Just get something basic in there talking about probably three things. Number one, what's unacceptable from a definition standpoint. Also, make sure that you let your employees know that their email is being monitored, and that company ownership applies to all internet, email, and social media stuff that's done on company time, under company roof, with company materials. Those kind of things are important to do.
Wow. And as a business owner, as long as you follow that due diligence, have it in the handbook that you're going to monitor their email, and you reserve that right, et cetera, and you get just a few of these policies and procedures outlined in their handbook and they sign it, I got to tell you something, when it comes to a difficult employee, I would say probably every one of your employees violates your internet policy every day in some way, shape, or form. It might be it might be very minor. However, if you need to terminate an employee, it can make a great excuse for terminating an employee.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And sometimes you have that trouble employee that's on their last leg, and it sounds really bad, but it's reality. Sometimes you're just literally looking for reasons to get rid of them. This could be your way out in that case. I don't think any of us ever want to, nobody wants a bad employee. Everybody wants to have good people, but everybody has them. You all deal with an issue from time to time, so that might be an avenue to take. So, all right, I don't think we have any questions that have come up, so I think we're going to go ahead and end the call. Josh, I just want to thank you again for your time. I think it was very informative. We will have this recording. I did record the webinar, and it will be up on Vimeo over the next couple days here, so we'll get that done, and then it'll be searchable and viewable in the future. And we can go from there. Josh, thanks again, and thank you, everybody, for today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks a lot, Josh. Have a good everybody, and this ends the call.